Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on day 2 of our Africanization-Decolonisation Indaba. Prof. Keert will do the welcome and opening remarks shortly. I'm just here to do a little bit of housekeeping. Firstly, the safety briefing, if anything should happen and you're asked to evacuate, it's outside these 2 exit doors, and then to the left, outside to the grass area, there's an assembly point where everyone could just wait for further instructions. Bathrooms are out the back. If anyone needs a wheelchair accessible bathroom, please let us know. There is one outside to the left through one of the glass doors. The one straight outside is out of order currently. Other than that, there is an exhibition. Some of the apartheid wall and the Mandela shirt are interactive, so feel free to engage with them. There are also books for sale in the literature corner just outside here to the left, so feel free to look at those. And some of the art that is displayed is for sale, so if you see something you like, you can check the little tags for the price and for contact details to get in touch with them. Other than that, if you need anything else, just look for those of us with a little yellow sticker. You can ask us for anything and we'll do our best to assist you. And on that note, let me hand over to Prof. Andre Keert, DVC Engagement Transformation, to open the day's events for us. Thank you.
Good morning, colleagues. I also need to brief you on a few things in the context of the protest actions at our university. Of course, the information that I got was that at 1 o'clock during the night, all the students were in accommodation. Now, of course, information is information. You know, that's the information that gets fed to me because I ask the team so that I can report back to this space, because it's important for us to engage in the context. If somebody can just ask the colleagues there to come in, that would be great, because it's a bit of a disturbance to see them mulling around there. Ponzo, please ask Clifford and that team to come in there, please, ma'am. So that is the one. But of course, the idea of voice was also raised yesterday. And my thinking is that if in any other way, students, even in the context of, say, the matter being engaged, still wish to come here, that would be fine, and we'll engage with it when that happens. And the same goes for the workers' strike that is currently underway as well. I also have to just apologize because of just in the way in which security measures at universities plays itself out. It doesn't matter whether you ask, security to be discreet at a distance and, provide for some protection in an invisible way. Those kinds of things just doesn't work. I've been running up and down, more or less, explaining that tactical gear is not necessary, the devices are not necessary, and all those things. But it's very difficult, because people think that you're interfering with their jobs as well. It's a sad, securitization of the university space that has been on the move now for the past few years. I suspect that we will have to have a serious discussion about how that can work in a much better way that doesn't provide for the symbolic expression of threats against protesters, but give a sense of, dynamic security for those entering these spaces. We have not had a discussion like that as to, in situations like these, what would be for a university the type of guidelines for security and protection measures and for security and protection behaviors as well. And this is not the first time that we had to intervene. 2 weeks ago at the Robert Sobukwe lecture as well, I literally had to request the security just to disappear somewhere because as I was driving to the event, there were already people indicating to me that just the way in which that particular training plays itself out in the university space seems a bit inappropriate and over the top. And we haven't had that discussion as yet. I know that somebody like Jane Duncan has written a lot about that in the context of the University of Johannesburg. So I want us to think how we do that. Yeah, but I'm in a bind, as you may well know, given the contradictions that we spoke about yesterday. It's now our, what one can say, probably an ontological reality of the higher education space. So perhaps not a bad one either, that can shake up the creativities that we so desperately require in our space. Yesterday when I made the closing remarks, and I'm not going to repeat it here, just to say I was, just in terms of what we set out to do, I think that the faculties have done a great job in, the way in which they grappled with the questions at hand. It does give a sense of the university in relation to its AfriCDecol work, which tallies very well with the survey results that we had. And I will share with you that, just some of the data of that mapping exercise, because it ties in, with the remarks that I made yesterday, and of course also those different types of observations that came through as well. So based on the initial data, and this came from all the faculties, that as far as the implementation of AfriCDecol imperatives within the curriculum is concerned, and as you could see yesterday as well, great moves, and of course also uneven progress, and a differentiated understanding of the AfriCDecol project. And that is very, very okay. The second one, of course, is that the knowledge domains and the knowledge fields, we're going to listen today as to how governance and auditing, for instance, can be decolonized. The areas of work and the knowledge fields, they have particular entry points that is differentiated across the disciplines. That's one of the, what one can say, realities that one needs to work with. And perhaps when we then speak about uneven progress, we have to take into consideration the nature of the knowledge fields and the knowledge domains as well. Of course, the interesting thing for me is the second finding, and that is that most of the respondents actually suggested that the idea of Southern and African indigenous perspectives that are located within so many programs is one entry point for the AfriCDecol pathways. Now, this came out clearly yesterday in some of the presentations that colleagues were making. Fantastic work. So conceptually, we will have to debate the interplay between Africanization, decolonisation, and indigenous knowledge systems, and how those concepts hold together as well. And especially in the hard sciences, how we provide for a conversation across disciplines to give colleagues a sense of a trajectory that may be different, but have a broad set of parameters that is true to what the university, or at least the colleagues within the university, would like to achieve as well. The question around programs that engage with knowledges across intergenerations also came through in the survey results. Very, very firm indication of that yesterday as well. The idea of constant debate and what knowledges gets privileged, how those knowledges are tied to the profit-making exercise of the global economic order, that also came through yesterday, but was also presented within the survey results. And then, of course, students very, very much interested in whether within the university space we can have a set of decolonized student attributes, of course, and then decolonized staff attributes, and then how things like, different kinds of engagement work can find expression with that. So there's also a big element of interdisciplinary work coming through from the faculties and from the surveys as well. And they tend to focus to a large extent on the modules that aims at professions, like education and social work. But of course, the colleagues also indicate that some of these modules are not distributed equally across the different faculties, and that is also something that one can probably just say, okay, that's part of how the university functions. The critical consciousness model, one of the arguments that the Faculty of Education also made yesterday, is something that requires some kind of embeddedness across the university. They argue for the compulsory nature of certain curricular thematic areas to be located within the faculties, and also for this particular module to then work in that direction. Now, there another way in which that links with it. But the critiques of our own work also, connects very well with what happened yesterday. The one is the varying degrees of progress around African decolonization across our areas, and the acknowledgement that this will be forever a work in progress, permanently. There is no end point to that. Also, the question, Bruce, especially in the context of the work that you're trying to do, is to how one doesn't preface IKS at the expense of community survivalist knowledges that are already at play within our societies, and how does one extract those? Now, we have had, of course, idealistically thought at the time that we would like to have a structure within the university that is semi-formalized, with community representation that engage with the university 3 mandates, on a consistent basis, and like a type of committee that feeds into our governance structures. Now, the registrar says we will get there once we have sought out how that may look like. But the argument there was that if the community is regarded as part of the university, and the university as a general citizen of a broader community, then of course the interplay between those structures within communities and university should be a bit more fluid. And some of the work that Bruce has been doing, of course, is responding to that. And then the constructive critique that colleagues have offered is that people literally sometimes do not know what to do. You say, okay, this is the Africanization project, and this is the decolonization project, and then people try things, and we must support them in trying those things. And in other spaces, of course, have very courageous conversations as to how we can better and sharpen, the ways in which we do this work. And so the question around how we think the relevance of this program across the knowledge field is very, very key in terms of the survey results. We have loaded the survey results also up to the website, so you can have access to some of the work that's been happening in the university. All to say, colleagues, that what I see happening in this Indaba is a university community wrestling with a particular objective that it tries to pursue. And that is sufficient. Okay? The constant wrestling. Because it is when you encircle a difficult problem constantly, you provide the cracks for doing good things in that space. Now, even amidst some of the massive structural challenges that we're facing, that makes social justice work within a university so difficult, but as I always say, difficult but not impossible, okay? And the ways in which we ourselves, the point that Nadima again raised yesterday around complicity, how we ourselves as to extricate, our own minds, from both neoliberal subjectivities and, of course, colonial subjectivities, to contribute to systematically challenge the structures that are producing us, okay? Not to do so would be to give up our agency and undercut the very work that you are doing on a daily basis. And the reason why those kinds of things are possible is because people, even within this context, are doing great work, against a particular train that moves in a direction, built on structures that is very, very difficult to challenge. So with that, colleagues, that's my opening remarks for the second day. Once again, very grateful to the team, of course, for this work. I also just have to excuse, I will leave around lunchtime because I have a university engagement, with the Thabo Mbeki Foundation later in the afternoon in Johannesburg. But the colleagues will hold things together here for us. And if anything happens in ways that we will have to reconfigure or retune or rethink what's happening today, that will also take place in ways, that will settle the concerns we have as a community in any case. So with that, many, many thanks. I'm looking forward to today's discussions. And thanks for pitching. And thanks to Jenny and the team once again, okay, for holding this together so well. Much thanks, colleagues. Enjoy.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks, Prof, for that very honest and thought-provoking introduction. Without further ado, I would like to introduce the next session, which is the Transdisciplinary Institute for Mandela Studies, or TIMS, a decolonisation project. And I'd like to invite the speakers to take their seats, please. Crane Sudeen, Norman Duncan, and Vern Harris. I believe Crane will be kicking off the presentation. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sonia. Good morning, colleagues. Good, because I was here yesterday and Pamela Maseko said morning to you and you just So really great to be here. What we're going to do this morning is give you a sense of what this Transdisciplinary Institute of Mandela Studies is all about, and how it comes to, in a sense, constitute and respond to the idea of decolonisation and Africanisation. So I'm going to kick it off. I'm going to be supported in the course of talking by Vernon and Norman, and they will interrupt as they see fit if I'm not putting things as clearly as I should, please. And I didn't say this, Andre, but I invite you too also to pitch in if you want to. Okay, so this is basically what we're going to do. We're going to talk a little bit about our understanding of decolonisation and what decolonisation is. We want to give you a sense of the idea of Mr. Mandela. Andre teases me, I cannot talk about Mr. Mandela other than in that respectful way. We'll come on to talk about what TIMS is itself. I then try and show you how these themes of decolonisation infuse and Africanisation are infused into the aims of TIMS, and then we'll tell you a little bit about yourselves. Because what we have done is to have engaged with the university for the last 2 years around this meaning, the significance of the meaning of Mr. Mandela, of Mandela for a university. At that point, Vern will take over and Norman will conclude. So I'd like to, first of all, begin by saying how we come to understand what this process of decolonisation is. Now, of course, we've been talking about this significantly for the last day. But there are a couple of things about this that I think are really important. The first thing is this second paragraph, coloniality. It's really too important, this idea of coloniality as a process of formation, which all of us have experienced, all of us. It has come to shape the ideas of all of us, and you'll hear me using the word totalizing a little later, in a way which comes to inflect almost every single thing that we think about. So coloniality is a process. It's a process that unfolds in our heads and in our minds. So it's not simply a political state in which we find ourselves. It's not simply the fact that South Africa sovereignty rests in Britain. That's colonialism. Coloniality is what the remains of that particular experience are as they are expressed in your consciousness, in the way in which you think. So all of the symbols, all of the practices of colonialism come to inform your thinking, your understanding, your decision-making, your choice-making, and so on. So that's what coloniality is. We are now talking about decolonization, and you can talk about decoloniality too. Decoloniality is that process of trying to be conscious of how coloniality has come to shape you. To be able to historicize every element of that particular experience, from the name that you carry, to the ways in which you conduct yourself, your relationships with others, how you think of solidarity, how you think of difficult terms like race, tribe, nation, and so on. To think of deconstructing all of that. And that's what decolonization is. And it involves two things. It involves knowing and being. So this knowing is absolutely central to understanding how a coloniality works. Because we talk about knowing here, or more fancily, epistemology. Epistemology is that frame which you use to be able to make sense. It's your sense-making apparatus and structures and procedures. And so we're making the argument here that what colonialism does is to give you a way of knowing the world, a way of coming into the world and to be instantly making sense of what is going around you. You see stop street signs, it's all part of the process. You come to see the ways in which regulations are governed when you meet each other, how you meet each other, how you engage with each other. All of those are forms of knowing. So that's the one element in it, knowing. The other element in it is related. It's being or ontology. Being is how you conduct yourself, how you are in the world. It's your state of mind. It's the way in which you come to a sense of who you are, what you are all about. And so, of course, with these ways of being, we can talk about black consciousness, we can talk about whiteness, we can talk about other forms of nationalism or tribalism. All of those are forms of being. But they all have histories, and they are all related to this question of how you know. So knowing and being are crucial concepts which we have to not only negotiate, but I'd like to say to you, it ought to be part of everybody's literacy. All of us ought to be literate about how we appreciate, how we come to understand the world, and how we are in the world. All of us. Not just educated people. It's the right of everybody. And you need to come to that sense always knowing that you are in a socially constructed world. That these forms of knowing, that these forms of being, you are not born with. They're not in your genes. You don't have genes that say to you, you European, keep your knife and fork in this particular way. You are taught all of those things. They are socially constituted. So it's really important to have a working grasp of these concepts when we talk about these things. So just to say a little bit about knowing and decolonization. The big point about decolonization is the attempt to deal with this hegemon, this juggernaut, this thing that is so overwhelming in us. This thing which has come to, and I use the word totalize here again, this thing that has come to totalize our realities, totalize our consciousnesses. And so what we are trying to do here in this process of decolonization is to say, actually, there are alternative ways through which we can come to consciousness and understand the whole of the universe. There are ways in which we can come to name things, classify things, order things, the ways in which we come to see how things are related to each other, and to come to understand what causes things to happen in the world. There are other ways of knowing. There are multiple ways of coming to all of that in the world. But we are in the presence of this coloniality which has come to, as I say, dominate and assume this total status in our lives. Being, the corollary of that, is coming to understand the implications of knowing as an alternative way of understanding. Alternative, and that alternative could be anything. Politically, right now, in this country, in this kind of context, blackness and Africanness are really important recoveries that we are attempting to talk to as ways of being. To recover alternatives that are rooted in their own epistemologies, in their own cosmologies, in their own ways of seeing what the world, how the world works, and how we might be in the world. And it's asking us to recognize that we can be different, that we can be alternatives to what this dominance is all about. Now, this is where Mandela Studies, we'd like to make the argument for all of you, is absolutely important. So we're on the beginning stages here of an idea which we want to say doesn't come out fully fleshed out right from the beginning. So we're talking about the idea of Mandela Studies here, and we're not saying to you that here is a formulation, here is a kind of manifesto for what this Mandela Studies is all about. We are on a journey, as Andre says, and that journey is to come to understand the implications of carrying this name Mandela. And we are asking, what does the implications, or what are the implications of having this name Mandela for what you do in mathematics, in sociology, in psychology, engineering, and so on. What are the implications? Because we'd like to say that, we'd like to think that there are implications. And we're beginning to flesh out here the possibilities of what that might be. Just to say, give you an historical context, the idea of TIMS, of course, comes out of a council meeting in 2019 to adopt the idea of a transdisciplinary institute. And its core purpose is essentially to provide intellectual and strategic leadership and oversee engagement and transformations in support of the vision and strategic perspectives of the university. Now, that's really important. I've done a lot of work in universities looking at university strategic plans. They all look alike. You go from one university, you can see it looks exactly like, what the other university. They're all copying each other. We're trying to be different here. We're trying to say, how does our strategic plan take on this provocation of a Mandela? And how does that provocation come to steer and influence and inflict the things we do inside of the university? And so there are two aims to what we want to do. And the first aim is to transform the university through an engagement, a critical engagement with the Mandela social figure. And we want to emphasize critical. So this is not, those of you who are historians, this is not hagiography. So this is not a romance with Mr. Mandela, right? It could be that, but it isn't. We're trying to use the idea of Mr. Mandela here in a critical way, in a way which leads us to look for strengths and weaknesses, problems, shortcomings, blind spots, all of those things. So we're in the presence of Mr. Mandela, and we want to use the idea of Mandela in a generative way. And that generative way means looking into the future. That's the first thing. The second thing is fostering a commitment to social justice. And we'd like to invite all of you to be part of this, to become and think of Nelson Mandela University as the global hub for Mandela studies. And why shouldn't we, right? Why shouldn't we? Why should Princeton University be the center of Mandela studies? Why? Right? So it's really crucial to be holding on to those two objectives. Now, I just want to order the slides a little differently, Neil. So I've skipped a slide. Remind me to go back to it. But this is now giving you a sense of how Mandela or TIMS syncs or aligns or portends or promises where we could be going. Thanks. I see the warning. How Mandela aligns with these ideas of knowing and being. So I'd like to start with Mandela, the social figure here. And what we're saying to all of us here, that we have in the figure of Mr. Mandela an important prism through which we can come to understand human agency. The will to act. A great thing about Mandela was his ability to act in extraordinarily diverse kinds of circumstances, against oppression, but also in the presence of his own privilege. How do you act in that way? So we're saying that how do we then use the way in which Mandela engaged with power to be able to make sense of the possibilities that come to thinking about our own human being selves. And the second thing is and it develops that, and I still am working with the theme of being here. And the second thing is just to think about how Mandela offers us an idea of what it means to be an African in the world. An African in the world. Because he is a global figure. He's a worldly figure. He is worldly. He can fit in almost anywhere. He comes into spaces and he's entirely comfortable with himself. But he remains completely, if you like, honest and rooted in his childhood experiences. So he never forgets the virtue of those experiences. And that's really important for us to say, that we have, through the figure of Mr. Mandela here, an important opportunity to understand how this virtue or this characteristic of being works. But it's also about the opportunity of TIMS as a global hub. So we'd like to think here that in scholarly terms, we, through all of your work, through engineering, through social work, and we've heard a little bit about that already, can come to see how Mandela takes academic expression. How do you do that? And it's enormously exciting, I want to say to all of you, just taking on an idea like that. As all of you might do in thinking of yourselves as Christians, Hindus, Muslims, and so on, and thinking, how am I going to teach my sociology course on Marx? You know, or how am I going to teach literacy or interpretive studies in French through the idea of my own history? And it's not an easy thing. You've got to think. You've got to think really deeply about how you do that. So we'd like to say that we have this opportunity here of being a global hub, you know, for Mandela studies. Bringing all of this together here, and I'm going to stop at this particular point. Fortunate, and you're going to have to give extra time to Vern and Norman, but I just want to say, you've got to keep, as you are thinking about these last 2 days, these things, these two, and I'm going to call them, if you like, mastheads in your head. Knowing and being. Knowing and being. And asking how these things come together. And to help us, you know, through this prison of Mr. Mandela, come to understand how this university gives expression to the promise of a Mandela, but also to a very important way in which we can come to think about how to be Africans in this global space in which we find ourselves. So over to you, Van. Thanks.
Good morning, everybody. I think for Norman and I, it's going to be a little bit like giving short closing prayers after the preacher's sermon. Mine will be very short. You're going to have to do it. So I want to speak to a process that we've conducted in TIMS over the last 18 months, where we conducted focus group discussions within disciplinary contexts. So we met with psychology students. Sometimes we met with just faculty, sociology faculty, sometimes a combination of faculty and students. And the question to each of these focus groups was, what does the name Mandela register for you, if anything? Mandela, the historical figure, Mandela, the social figure. We heard voices expressing no interest at all. It doesn't mean anything to us. We heard voices saying that the name is irrelevant to this generation. We heard voices saying, well, Mandela was a sellout, and the name is therefore profoundly problematic. And we also heard voices just expressing fatigue at the endless references to Mandela. But for most, the name does mean something important, both in terms of opportunity and responsibility. My ears were hearing 4 primary compass points for that significance. Firstly, that both for individuals within the university, but for the institution itself, it is not about living up to a name. Rather, it is about a singular responsibility before that name, in relation to that name. Secondly, that individuals within the institutions, from students to administrators, everyone, individuals are called to be engaged fully in the transformation of the institutional space, turning the university into a liberatory space. Thirdly, the institution itself is called to making its spaces liberatory, just. And then, fourthly, research and learning across all disciplines and fields should be geared to the making of a just society and should be shaped fundamentally within an ethics frame. So if you're studying mathematics, you still have to have modules that teach you the ethics of the discipline. Going to move on, just asking the question, given that significance, for TIMS, what are the modes of engagement? What are we called to be doing? And I'm going to end with that and then hand over to Norman. So 3 modes of engagement. Firstly, TIMS has to be about fostering an engagement ecosystem across not only the university narrowly defined, but all its constituencies as well. Secondly, securing an understanding of initiatives already underway and building momentum around them. We heard about some of those initiatives yesterday, but I just want to name a few my ears didn't hear yesterday, but which we encountered in the last 18 months. In sociology, there are a group of young lecturers who are beginning to conceptualize and build a curriculum for an African sociology, inspired by the name Mandela. Babalwa at the Center for Women's and Gender Studies. Number of really important initiatives there, research on the voices of women that have been excluded, diminished, precisely by that dominant Mandela narrative. They've developed a transdisciplinary course, Social Consciousness and Sustainable Futures, and the opening module for that is given by Prof. Nomalanga Mkiza, which interrogates critically the Mandela name and how it signifies. So understanding those initiatives and beginning to pull them together in terms of a momentum for the university. And then lastly, for TIMS, there has to be a responsibility to encourage research and analysis that demystifies Nelson Mandela. Now, in my view, these myths about Madiba all have to do with a binary, an either or. So either Madiba was a sellout, or he was an iconic leader. Either he was an Anglophile who by the time he came out of prison actually thought in English and had to translate into Xhosa, or he was an exemplar of African excellence. Either Madiba was a symbol of modernity or the inheritor of long Tembu traditions. Either he was a typical Eastern Cape boy who escaped the province as soon as he could and only came back to be laid to rest, or he was that leader who made the Eastern Cape part of a nation. Either Madiba came out of prison without bitterness and forgave his former enemies, or he's that person who came out of prison with a well of woundedness, a deep anger that could be triggered very easily, but who chose to channel that anger in ways that were constructive for him personally, his personal journey, and for the collective journey. Either Madiba was a leader who was very good at consulting, part of a collective leadership, or he was that leader adept at taking unilateral decisions and then getting the collective on board. Now, I could keep going on, the either or, the either or. I would argue that the task of the university is to explore the both ands. Madiba was both this and that. And it is precisely in the space of contradiction, the space of tension, that the liberatory energies are located for the work of decolonization and Africanization. Those are the energies that will take us beyond colonization and oppression, beyond Eurocentrism, and I think we have to say it ultimately, beyond Mandela. Over to you, Norman.
Thank you, Vern Crane. And I want to start out by thanking the university for having offered me the opportunity to participate in this conference over the past 2 days. And of course, I've been involved with Crane and with Vern over several months. And it's really been an honor and privilege to be part of these discussions around decolonization and Africanization. I must also say, that I've been exposed to the work of so many universities over the past few years. And it's the first time that I encounter a university space where there's such a sustained engagement with issues of decolonization and Africanization. And I want to commend the university for that. Yes, I acknowledge what Andre said earlier today, that perhaps the discussions are a bit uneven. Perhaps in certain respects, certain people are thinking in ways that we had not imagined before to take the debate forward, and other people are perhaps a bit behind in terms of the engagement with these, critical engagement with these topics. But the critical thing is that people are engaged, that there's this ongoing discussion, and I think that is critically important. And I want to reiterate what Andre said this morning. This discussion, of course, will have no end. This debate will have no end. This engagement with these topics will have no end. It's an ongoing process. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, I've been asked to speak about reimagining a university. Now, I'm very cognizant of the fact that I've got about 2 to 3 minutes to do so. And so to save time, because I do tend to go on about issues and use too many words, and then I end up using too much time. So I'm going to read what I prepared to share with the audiences today. And I start with saying that universities have historically been viewed as institutions of intellectual pursuit. Indeed, institutions that have the pursuit of knowledge as their very raison d'etre. Currently, we are reflecting on decolonization and Africanization in the university's mission of knowledge production and knowledge dissemination. Now, while this pursuit of knowledge and the decolonization and Africanization of knowledge are arguably very important, we must remind ourselves that it is equally important for universities to recognize that their knowledge work is diminished if it does not translate into tangible change and improvement in people's lives. In essence, the true measure of a university's worth, now and in the future, will lie not simply in the generation of knowledge, as critically important as this may be, but also in the university's ability to deploy that knowledge for the benefit and betterment of society. Through research, teaching, and community engagement, universities have the power to address pressing societal challenges, foster innovation and renewal, and promote social justice. However, for this potential to be realized, intellectual endeavors must be intentionally geared towards impacting people's lives in meaningful ways. Here, in the context of our consideration of a reimagined university, I want to pause very briefly on the university's obligation towards students and through students, broader society. However we conceptualize the teaching and learning project of the University of the Future, we should ensure that the education that is afforded students, to paraphrase Amartya Sen, gives them access to the skills, attributes, and substantive freedoms that enable them not only to fulfill their career or work aspirations and to lead more actualized lives, but also to contribute to the life chances of others in our society who do not yet have the opportunities that they have. A very small proportion of the young people of South Africa have access to university education. A smaller fraction of them will ultimately complete their studies within a minimum period of time. So ultimately, what I need to emphasize is also that the participation rates in higher education are abysmally low in South Africa. So there's really a small privileged group that have access to university education. And the best one can do then, in our hopes to improve the lot of most people in South Africa, is to try and ensure that the young people that come through the portals of the university, the young people who leave this university with qualifications, will be able to utilize their knowledge to the betterment of society, to the betterment of communities, to the betterment of their families who had sacrificed in order to get them an education. And that for me is the most important message that emanates from the book, Development as Freedom, written by Sen, that these valuable freedoms that we acquire as a result of the education and at Nelson Mandela University, this transformed education, I will finish now, we can only put that to good use if, in fact, we ensure that the privileges that we have gained through that education get spread out to other people. Now, the position articulated by Sen in his book, Development as Freedom, reminds us of the following quote attributed to Nelson Mandela, and I quote, "To be free is to live in a way that respects and enhances the freedom of others." Now, ladies and gentlemen, the sign banners in this hall says, and I quote, "Change the world." To my mind, one of the key ways in which the university can contribute to a changed world is through the quality of the education that it affords its students. And the quality of the education that the university offers its students is determined by how seriously it engages the imperative of decolonizing, democratizing, and Africanizing the knowledge project. I thank you.
Yes, I'd like to thank our speakers for that really provocative presentation, prompting us, compelling us in a way to consider, among other things, what the implications are of carrying this name Mandela for the different disciplines within our university. 30 minutes is by no means enough time to get into the nitty-gritty of the really important work being done by this team. And in a similar vein, the time that we have left to engage this presentation really cannot do it justice. But I think that the thinking behind these kinds of engagements is that it provides a kind of catalyst for us to continue these kinds of conversations beyond the confines of this wall, of this campus, and take it into the spaces where we live and work and where the real work is actually taking place. Similarly, we do have tea and lunch coming up, so please do feel free to speak to our speakers then if you are not able to articulate your questions here. With that in mind, I would like to open up the floor for a couple of questions. If there's, to reference Nobu yesterday, any burning questions that you have that you cannot wait to ask, please do feel free to raise those now. I've noted one hand. Excellent.
Thanks so much, colleagues, Crane, Van, and Norman. And it's actually not a question. I just want perhaps the three of you to take a brief minute or two to track the different movements that have happened over the past few years around the Mandela identity formulation, so that the colleagues here have a sense of a vast archive of thinking and work that can assist the different academics and students in engaging with those debates that we have had now for the past 4 or 5 years, and then perhaps just Neil to find a way in flagging that particular archive, because I think it's a great archive, the mapping archive and so on, and perhaps to say something more about that and the way in which those particular reports and archive can be of use to the project of Africanization and decolonization.
Sorry, there's another question there.
Thank you. Morning, colleagues.
Please go ahead.
I didn't want Prof. Kiet to be the only one talking, but I see Bruce is also. Prof. Sudin, I hope I'm going to articulate this because I'm kind of moved by your presentation, especially in the knowing and being. And it's a question and maybe a comment. Are we able to meet the work if we haven't met ourselves? Because I understand you only meet others at the level at which you've met yourself, or as we journey towards the work will journey towards us. Because if I don't know who I am and what I'm rooted in, the work is going to trigger.
Thanks, Chairperson. I'm sitting with a bit of tension around the notion of the icon, the concept of the icon, and then what we are claiming we could do in our generation in dealing with some of the historical and contemporary challenges. And I based this on some of Enver's comments yesterday that the battle when Mandela was alive and the struggles we face now are beyond an individual or beyond a collective. It's a global struggle. And then to perhaps, so the tension as Crane and others were speaking that I'm sitting with is, do we have the potential of doing damage to the name as we center this name in trying to address challenges that were way beyond Nelson Mandela as an individual as well?
Thank you for those thoughtful questions. I'm going to hand over to our speakers to perhaps begin responding to them, please.
No, those are absolutely fabulous questions. We could spend a lot of time thinking about that. But I'd like to think that you're going to do that in all of your subjects, actually, all of your disciplines. You will, sorry, I don't know your name at the back there. Vuyo, that every single discipline will give you the opportunity to be able to orientate yourself in relation to it. Right? In relation to it. Because all of your disciplines have histories. They come from somewhere. And they come out of a particular way of trying to think of solving a problem. So those histories are not innocent histories. They have deep baggage. I'm a sociologist, and I fight all the time with sociology because sociology cannot see itself. It is unable to see the ways in which it is not only complicit, but it is a racializing discipline. Like anthropology, aspects, the way in which historiography is approached, like even psychology. All of these disciplines are really problematic. Now, how do you come to it, Vuyo? How do you situate yourself in it? And I can say this only, and I'm not going to, I hope I don't offend you, it's to trouble your own history also. To come to understand your own becoming. Because your own becoming is itself not a romance. I mean, I use that word again. You've come to a particular time and a point in history through incredible processes which begin outside of you, which have long histories of thousands of years. And you've got to try and understand that. So when this encounter happens between yourself, your own historicization and the historicizer, it's going to be an incredibly dynamic and combustive. It's going to be combustive. And you have to be prepared for it. But you've got to do that in every single discipline in which you find yourselves. And I think it's the most wonderful thing that happens. You know, that when you come to understand that these knowledges all historically have particular stories to tell, and that you're in the presence of stories. You know, and how you then begin to use those stories in generative kinds of ways. And it's really exciting. So just, Vern will answer your question, Bruce, but I want to say to you that we've got to be confident that in the way in which we work with this idea of Mr. Mandela, we are going to be both respectful and critical. Right? Respectful and critical. Now, Vern is going to say a whole lot more around all of that, but our idea is to locate him in history in a particular kind of way, in the way in which I've been talking about, and to see how that helps us understand. Because my own story around this, I tried to tell the story of Mr. Mandela in relation to modernity. And the point that I make about him is that he is a response to modernity. He is modern in an incredibly exemplary way. Because he doesn't deny, if you like, what modernity has offered, but he's not uncritical of it. You know? So he comes into it in a way which is deeply, I think, and I, you know, hoping that TIMS will make a lot of this. He comes to it thinking about being and knowing. And so being and knowing are at the heart of his praxis. But Vern, you run with it.
Yeah, just very briefly, Bruce. I think you've nailed a key challenge. Of course, the institution can do damage to the name Nelson Mandela, and I think any form of elevating an individual, a name, runs that terrible risk. I mean, Nelson Mandela Bay has done damage to the name. And the ways in which Madiba was elevated as a leader means that he symbolizes then the frustrations today around the compromises that were made during negotiations and the mistakes that were made during that first administration. It's not the collective, it's Nelson Mandela. I think just, Andre, you wanted us to signal, in terms of TIMS as a process, it goes back to 2017. We've done surveys using social media. We've convened scholarly colloquia. So we've generated an archive, reports on all of those processes, mapping documents in terms of what we've done, what has emerged from them. Neil, do you want to talk about where that archive is going to be available? It's going to be on the website, right?
Sorry. I'm heading up that archive project, and it will be hosted under AfDeP, which is an online repository for higher education transformation. Dr. Jenny Dupree is coordinating that project, and the TIMS archive, which we're going to be calling the Mandela Observatory, will be hosted there because we see this project as, the TIMS project, as a transformation driving force. So we're going to host it there on AfDeP, and all university-related projects, initiatives, research will be referenced there as they come about, and we will also go further back in time to find them.
Thank you. And colleagues, I really dislike being this person. But I do have to start wrapping up this session. We do have parallel sessions that are about to begin. I'd like to give Crane just a minute just to wrap up.
So just to say, Andre, the way in which this institute could have been established, and you can think about this, could have been through a bureaucratic imposition. The university could have come here and said, we are establishing, because we now Nelson Mandela University, we are establishing this institute. But what we are doing, and I'd like to appeal to your kind of imagination here. We are trying to think about how this thing can be organically embedded, built through and with you to come to a particular formation. And that formation isn't completely clear yet, right? It's not particularly clear. But we'd like to think that an organic thing will emerge here, which is of you, by you, and with you. Sorry to use those cliches, you know. And it's important in thinking about the future of the university, because the university right now, say it, is governed by these neoliberal kinds of principles. And the neoliberal principle is essentially what the market is asking. The market wants a Nelson Mandela, right? But we don't want to give that kind of marketized version, which is being expected. We want to give a generative version that will problematize this figure of Mr. Mandela going into the future.
I'd like to thank our speakers once again for really, really provocative presentation that I think has been a fantastic kickstart to day 2 of this event. There are 2 sessions that will run parallel now, run by the students. The first one will take place in this main conference center, and that will be facilitated by Kenilwe. And then as you leave this main center, to your left in breakaway room 3 will be the second parallel session, and that will be facilitated by Sine. If we can just thank our presenters once again.